Hey, Al, Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co. All right, y'all, Scott Horton here, and I got a great deal for you. Anyone who helps support this show with a $50 donation or more gets a copy of the brand new Rothbard book, Murray N. Rothbard book, of long-lost essays from 1967 and 68. It's entitled Never a Dull Moment, A Libertarian Looks at the 60s. Murray N. Rothbard, really Mr. Libertarian himself, on Vietnam, conscription, civil rights, LBJ and Nixon, and all kinds of great stuff from back during those times. Never a dull moment, and it's an exclusive. It's not available on Amazon yet. It's an exclusive, so far at least, for listeners of this show, so be the first to get it. Help support this show at the same time. Just go to scotthorton.org/donate, and again, anyone who sends $50 on this way, along with a mailing address, and I will get this book right to you. Thanks. All right, y'all, Scott Horton Show. Check out the archives at scotthorton.org. More than 4,000 interviews going back to 2003 there. And sign up for the podcast feed at scotthorton.org. Follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Introducing Edward Stringham. He is a professor of economics at Trinity College. And he's written this great article for the Wall Street Journal. Is America facing a police crisis? Oh, and I wanted to mention your book here, too. Sorry. It's available at Amazon.com. Private Governance, Creating Order in Economic and Social Life. So, sounds a little bit like Bob Murphy territory here, so maybe we can talk about that a little bit later on. But first of all, it's a very good article, very interesting and important article you have here for the Wall Street Journal. And anybody frustrated by the paywall, just put the title in Google News, and you should be able to click through. Maybe change browsers or clear your cookies or something if you have to. But if you search the title in Google News, it'll let you read it. It's called, Is America Facing a Police Crisis? Welcome to the show, Ed. How are you doing?
Hey, great. Scott, thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you joining the show. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, police crisis. Pretty much everybody thinks that on both sides of the argument, right?
Yeah, so it's like crazy. There's all this debate. There's people saying Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. People are really concerned with violence. Most people have very heated reactions. Some people say that police are committing too much violence. Other people are committing violence against the police. And so what I do is, in this article, is I basically took a step back and I said, let's just look at the data. And I was actually very surprised. The data was kind of shocking to me. It turns out that police represent 1 out of 360 of the population, but they kill 1 out of 12 people who get killed are killed by the police. So it's quite a shocking number. 1,207 people are killed per year, or last year rather, by police. And at the same time, some police are killed. But it turns out it was in 2015, it was 14 officers. And if you look at the homicide victimization rate of police officers, it's 4.6 per 100,000, which is basically the same as the overall population, which is 4.5 per 100,000. So the amount at which they kill is way higher than the amount of victimization rate that people are talking about for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, it's kind of brilliant of the government to hire the same force to do all the fining and feeing and regulating and enforcement that they do when somebody's robbing your house and you call in the middle of the night or something like that. You send the same guys out. So you can't really complain about any of it or, yeah, but what are you going to do if there's a violent crime against you? You have to call your heroes. So therefore, as they were saying, when people were running and taking cover with the help of police in Dallas, right-wingers on Twitter were saying, look at the irony of Black Lives Matter people asking for help from the cops in any way, when all they ever said was, stop murdering us, right? They weren't saying we want no police at all. They were saying, you're supposed to be our protectors, and yet we feel like you're hunting us all day, and so something is screwed up. But that was made to seem like it was some big contradiction, that they would even seek police help at all. But in truth, you know, a cop protecting you from a sniper is, you know, the least of their duties. That's not what this, law enforcement, what these organizations are about in the first place at all, really.
Yeah, so the problem is, in contrast to a business that needs to make sure the customer is happy, competing for the customer's dollar, police are basically a tax-funded monopoly. They get money from the taxpayers. They also get money, as you mentioned, from fines. So in Ferguson, this was particularly problematic where they were collecting money from people for all types of fines, and including for overgrown lawns. They would issue arrest warrants. In a city of 20,000 people, they had 9,000 arrest warrants in 1 year. And there was evidence that came to light of the tax collectors saying to the police, hey, can you ramp up the number of fines this year? Because we really need to increase the amount of revenue. So rather than serving and protecting the public, the police are used in many cases to extract resources from the public. So they view the public as kind of numbers game, where they get rated based on number of arrests, they get rated based on the amount of fines they give, and the result is mistreatment of the public and disregard of the well-being of the public, instead focusing on their own well-being at the expense of safety, basically.
Mm-hmm. Now, so when it comes to massive police violence against not just blacks, but really poor people, generally speaking, across the society, what's really changed? Is it just the cell phone cameras, or is it you want to go back to 80s ramping up of the drug war, or 90s ramping up of the militarization? Is there something that's a real watershed that changed in the training, where cops were made to go from minimal amount of force to more of a Colin Powell doctrine, overwhelming force and decisive immediate victory at any cost to protect the cop and that kind of thing?
Yeah,
what is the problem?
I think we've been seeing an increasing militarization of the police, which really probably has been going on for a long time, but really started ramping up in the 1990s. So a lot of people think that police are local concerns, it's local government, but it's become increasingly federalized. So with the 1994 crime bill that Clinton signed, the federal government provided billions of dollars for 100,000 additional, quote, community police. But I think that was really just a lip service. At the same time, these community police were starting to, quote, community police were starting to become increasingly militarized, where the government started giving hand-me-downs from the military to local police departments. So local police departments now can apply for excess military equipment, the equivalent of assault rifles, grenade launchers, what look to be like military vehicles, and then also now we have the Department of Homeland Security giving out billions of dollars in grants per year to local police departments for them to buy military equipment. So back in the old days, the American Revolution, one of their concerns is we don't want standing armies on our soil. And at this point, we basically have police acting as standing armies. In Hartford, Connecticut, where I teach, the police recently purchased 231 assault rifles, 50 sets of night vision goggles, a grenade launcher, and a mine-resistant vehicle. So I don't really know who's planting mines in Hartford, Connecticut, but this is the equivalent of a standing army. And people didn't really realize the extent of it until relatively recently in Ferguson after the anti-police protests. It was quite stunning to a lot of people to see these militarized police in military formation with guns drawn, scopes, all this stuff, which we expect to see in foreign territories, but not on our own soil.
Yeah. Now, I remember in the 90s when they first started really dressing up in kind of military fatigues all the time. Even if they weren't wearing full SWAT gear, they're still wearing sort of like black paramilitary, military, gear or whatever. It's not a dress shirt anymore. It's something like what a soldier would wear anyway, and usually black instead of blue or brown now, and that kind of thing. And I remember thinking, well, of course, they know that they're just helping making money for the city councilman's cousin who runs the fatigues company or is the salesman for it or whatever it is. But they must be kind of joking with each other about how silly this is, that they're so militarized when, and especially I live in Austin, Texas, which is such a nice town. Like the very worst neighborhood in Austin is really just fine. You know what I mean? Like there's some crime here and stuff like that. I'm not saying nothing bad happens here, but in a town where violent crime is so low, for these guys to be, I remember thinking that they must kind of joke about it. They must see the humor in it of how overdressed they are and how silly it is, the part that they play, dressing up in all of this stuff, all this gear, whatever. Don't they make fun of each other and how they look and that kind of thing? But I really guess not, right? The mindset adapts really quickly to, well, if these are our tactics and this is our equipment, well, then the people we're up against, the citizens of our town, obviously must be the kind of threat to warrant such a thing, and we better start treating them like the enemies they are. And then the next thing you know, guys are getting shot in the back.
That's right. So the whole idea of even this terminology that they use, the war on drugs, war implies there's enemy combatants. And so what the police have done is gone from, especially over the past 40 or so years, they're viewing American society like a combat field. In New York, at next to the 9/11 memorial, there's a new statue for emergency responders, and it really kind of indicates the mindset of a lot of police. And what it is, this is a statue for emergency responders. There's a galloping horse, and then on it is a policeman, and he's holding some type of machine gun or something. I'm not really sure what type of gun it is. But it's like, oh, okay, so 9/11 happens. We're going to send in the cavalry with machine guns on it. And obviously 9/11 was a tremendous tragedy. But the idea that emergency responders are going to show up with machine guns and stop 9/11 from happening, really, it's almost like the statue was designed by a 14-year-old boy. And I think it really shows the mindset of a lot of police where it's like, yeah, we're tough guys. Let's just get these tanks. Let's get this military. The idea that police should be wearing camouflage. Camouflage is designed for soldiers who are traveling through jungles or above grass, and they need to be blending in with nature. And wearing camouflage is just there's no reason for it. If they want to like blend in with the cities, they should be wearing uniforms that look like buildings or something. I don't know, or Starbucks. But the idea that they need to be having camouflage, it just shows that they want. There's unfortunately a huge desire of them, many of them, to look like the military, and they love it. They get all this free gear and they get to act very tough. A total disregard for actually keeping the public safe, reducing disorder. It's like, oh yeah, we're here. we're the tough guys. We're going to get the bad guys.
Yeah. Well, there's one famous case here in Austin where an Iraq vet who was a Austin police officer was chasing some robbers or burglars through a parking lot and just firing wildly at them. And one of the bullets went through the back of a lady's minivan and literally into the car seat where the baby just was. Luckily the baby wasn't in the seat at the time, but this kind of thing that, if you made it up, it might sound something like that, but that's actually exactly what happened. And this guy, he actually got kicked off the force, or I think maybe even resigned, and just said, whoa, all of a sudden I was back in Iraq, but actually I was at Springdale in 183 here in town. What am I doing? And realize, and that's the thing. A lot of guys, they come home from the Army or the Marine Corps, and there's a thing in their mailbox saying, hey, you want a job? And where you won't have to compete in the marketplace, and where there's no accountability for your actions ever, and where you start at $80,000 a year, come on and join the local Austin Police Department, and they sign right up. So we're all Falludians now, basically, at least to a degree, when you're dealing with a cop who is, in essence, undeniably, he's reenacting his previous job out in country somewhere with, again, people presumed to be enemy combatants. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here. Are you a libertarian and or peacenik? Live in North America? If you want, you could hire me to come and give a speech to your group. I'm good on the terror war and intervention, civil liberties stuff, blaming Woodrow Wilson for everything bad in the world, Iran, central banking, political realignment, and, everything. I can teach markets to liberals and peace to the right. Just watch me. Check out scotthorton.org/speeches for some examples, and email me, scott@scotthorton.org, for more information. See you there.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. There was a recent article, and I forget where it was. It might have been the Washington Post, but they asked 5 or so different experts to analyze different videos of police shootings. And there's this famous movie called Rashomon. It was from Japan, and it showed different people's perspective on a particular crime, and everybody had a very different perspective. And reading these police experts, shooting experts, discussion of crime and these police shootings, really amazing. And there was one lady who was a trainer for the Los Angeles Police Department, I believe, and consistently on each police shooting, she was like, oh, yeah, they needed to do that. Of course they needed to do that. So some of the ones which were other people considered very egregious examples of police shooting, she would say, oh, yeah, of course. It was clear. So there was this recent video of a couple weeks ago of a caretaker of an autistic man, and the autistic man had a toy truck, and the caretaker saw the police come, and he said, I'm unarmed, he's unarmed, this man is autistic, and there's no need for concern. And a lot of people saw this, but the police ended up shooting the caretaker. Luckily, he didn't die. But the lady who works for the Los Angeles Police Department is like, oh, yeah, of course they needed to do that. I'm exaggerating slightly, but not too much. Of course they needed to do that because it looks like he could have had a weapon. And so the idea that they're training police to shoot people when there's any possibility of something going wrong is quite alarming, quite scary, I'd have to say.
Yeah. Saw the same thing in Phoenix with the kid with the jacked up truck where, yeah, he had his hand behind his back and he was acting like an idiot, but if you rewind it a little bit, you can see that they had already seen his hand in front of him before or even behind his back, but when he was walking the other way, whatever it was, they could see his hand and they could see that it was not a gun. Whatever it was not a gun. I could see that in the grainy, cop cam. So, clearly the cops knew, but obviously their point of view is, hey, if I can, then I will. Never, the standard is not, I had no choice, which would be the standard if you killed somebody. Hey, I had no choice. Okay, that's a justifiable homicide. But to a cop, had no choice is, oh, hey, Judge, he was reaching for his waistband, because his pants were sagging. He was going to pull up his pants, so I murdered him because I can, and I got a 2 weeks paid vacation, and and not just in LA, but in every county in America, the DA gives it a rubber stamp and lets them go, 99.9% of the time?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because police who commit violence are very rarely held accountable. Their colleagues don't want to tell on them. And then the prosecutors actually work hand in hand with the police, and they don't want to be considered among the police somebody who is not cooperative. So they need the police to testify in court, oftentimes bogus testimony in court. And so any prosecutor who goes off after the police for wrongdoing, they're going to be viewed negatively by the police. So there's this entirely corrupt system where we allegedly have different branches of government, the judiciary versus law enforcement and police, but they're actually all working together and not holding police accountable when they commit crimes.
Yeah. I used to have a theory when I was a young, naive kid and still thought that there should be government at all. I thought, well, if you had only two jobs, national defense, in other words, the government should be strong enough to prevent a worse one from replacing it, and by force, and criminal justice, and I guess whatever, civil courts, even that could be privatized. But criminal justice, that should be impartial. The cops should be paid by everyone instead of anyone who has a dog in a fight that they're, settling. And the same for the judges and the juries and whatever. And then I thought, if the government didn't have 10 million things to do, but their actual only job was just making sure that the right guy goes to prison when somebody commits a crime, etc., then maybe the democracy and the checks and balances and the regular elections and the political parties and the belief in fairness and justice among the population would be enough to somehow secure a more or less just system. I mean, the way they describe the system, the protections in, Amendments 5 and 6 especially, all the episodes of Matlock I ever saw when I was a kid, they make it seem like, look, this is set up to be fair. It's an adversarial system. Even the defendant has a real chance to defend himself in the American system. And it seems like, I don't know. But I guess I don't really believe in that anymore. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe if that was the government's only job and that was the public's quote unquote only real concern when it comes to what their democracy was up to, and that was their priority, then, maybe it could be done. But it seems like now, Jesus, you could really be describing the law enforcement system in any corrupt, evil, horrible country that Americans would never want to visit, that they would be afraid to go there, like Turkey or Iran or some hellhole. Seriously.
If you look at the amount that police kill, and you calculate the rate, their killing rate of per 100,000 officers, which is the standard way in which we look at crime. So in the general public, the homicide rate is 4.5 out of 100,000, as I mentioned. For police, it's 135 per 100,000. So these people are killing at rates much higher than the most dangerous countries in the world. And a lot of people say, oh, well, we need this. They're all justifiable killings. But if you look at other countries, the police in England, in Germany, there's the same percentage of the population, and they kill less than 0.5% of the people who get killed. So it's quite stark, the amount of people who are killed in the United States compared to other countries. In general, I would react to your point about, we need them to focus on law enforcement. I think that's one of the most important areas in society, and to leave it at the hands of unaccountable, unionized officials who are basically above the law. They're enforcing judge, jury, and executioner when they commit these killings. I think this is like the worst possible thing that government could do. So I would say let's privatize everything. And I think we need to start with the police, the most important function in society. We should not be being controlled by a unaccountable, unionized government monopoly.
There, see, now you're talking. This is the first thing that we ought to get government out of the business of doing is criminal justice, huh?
Yeah, I mean, 100...
Wait. Let me pretend to be a liberal or a conservative, a Republican, a Democrat, a everyman, a anyone. Yeah, but then you just have nothing but private armies going to war all the time. That's why we created governments in the first place, is so there'd be a monopoly on that, and so we wouldn't have that kind of thing because it's a disaster.
Well, police departments, modern professional police departments, really only about 150 years old. There were lots of different types of private, there still is tons of private security today, private patrols, night watchmen. 1,000 years ago in England, the system was very, very decentralized, and they had a system that was restitution-based, where people would solve disputes on their own, and they would have also these groups where they would solve disputes. And over time, especially after the Norman invasion, the kings were saying, hey, you're paying restitution to victims. Why don't you pay some restitution to me as well? And then they started saying, well, why don't you pay all of the restitution to me rather than to the victims? And so they basically outlawed the private system and replaced it with a system of fines, which is now modern criminal law enforcement. And it was not created because of a lack of law enforcement. It was created as a way to raise revenue for the government.
That's fine. I guess I'm trying to think back to my very earliest founding myths of this kind of system from Saturday morning cartoons and whatever else, as a very young kid. Hatfields and McCoys, right? That's why we have government, or else it'd be nothing but Hatfields and McCoys, grudges and killing each other and people taking the law into their own hands. And that's why we have a sheriff. Yeah, well,
unfortunately, there were the Hatfields and McCoys, and now they're replaced by the Trumps and Clintons of the world. So the idea that we're going to create government and eliminate conflict. Government creates conflict. Government in the United States causes conflict in a lot of inner cities. You look at the satisfaction of police in the inner cities, it's very, very low. They don't have confidence in police, especially among African Americans. The confidence in police is very low. They believe that they're mistreated. And then we could see that abroad as well. So the idea that the United States is going to, kill the president or whatever, Gaddafi of Libya and all these other countries, and say, oh, great, now we're going to have perfect order afterwards, or we're going to bomb different countries and we're going to have perfect order. It's just an assumption that government is created to minimize disorder, when in fact they are often the biggest source of disorder at home and abroad.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And when you look at crime, obviously the largest part of crime is caused by poverty. And, there's a lot of different causes of poverty, including, yes, poor people have to take responsibility for their own actions and that kind of thing. But they also live in a country where their government wastes $1 trillion a year on a world empire. And they live in a country where we have this boom and bust cycle, again, engineered mostly accidentally by the central bank, trying to create a prosperous life for everyone. They create these massive bubbles that end up pulling the rug out from everybody. Even, upper middle class people get devastated every 8 years or so and have to try to start all over again. And then drug prohibition, of course, is the absolute worst thing in the world. Boy, is there a lot of chaos and violence and disruption in this society that is attributable to government policies in the first place, that it's so easy to see. Even if people can't necessarily imagine privatizing all police functions, you can certainly see how they're the root cause of so much of what's going on wrong here in the first place, that then we say, oh, we need these armies of cops to keep us safe from the poor people who are going to come and get us or whatever.
I've done research on international homicide rates and correlation between economic freedom. It turns out economic freedom is strongly correlated with lower rates of homicides. So you basically, when you take people's opportunities away from them, prevent them from being able to work, They're just going to be unemployed, angry at the world. In the United States, minimum wage laws especially are harmful for teenagers, especially minorities who oftentimes go to schools which are not the greatest in the world. And so when you make it more expensive to hire different people, there's fewer people hired. And right now the black teen unemployment rate is over 30%. And if you look at discouraged workers, ones who just don't even think about getting jobs, I'm sure it's a lot higher. And so right at the point when people should be getting skills, valuable working skills, opportunities to work for other people, government is preventing people from getting into the business world. And those people are more likely to be engaged in the life of crime. Drug war, similarly, that is very, very problematic. In the 1930s, 20s, and 30s, homicides increased with prohibition, and after alcohol prohibition, homicide rates decreased. And we saw the same thing with the advent of the drug war, the declaration of the drug war in the 1970s, and ramping it up in the 1980s. We saw increases in crime then. So the idea that government is there and it's going to decrease crime is actually, in many cases, it's actually the policies themselves from government are eliminating economic opportunity and encouraging people to engage in the life of crime.
Yep. I'm sorry we're out of time because we could talk about this all afternoon, and I could probably come up with more questions instead of just ranting and raving at you. But I really appreciate the time that you've given us on the show here today and this great article that you've got. I'd like to read your book someday if I ever get a chance to. I love the title, Private Governance, Creating Order in Economic and Social Life. That's Edward Stringham, and the article, again, is at the Wall Street Journal. You can get through the whole article by way of Google News, everybody. The title is America Facing a Police Crisis? Thanks again very much, Ed.
Scott, thanks so much for having me.
And that's the Scott Horton Show, scotthorton.org for the archive. Sign up for the podcast feed there. Help support at scotthorton.org/donate. $50 or more, and you get the brand new Murray Rothbard book, Never a Dull Moment. Exclusive offer at scotthorton.org/donate. And follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Thanks, y'all. Hey, I'll check out the audiobook of Lou Rockwell's Fascism versus Capitalism, narrated by me, Scott Horton, at audible.com. It's a great collection of his essays and speeches on the important tradition of liberty. From medieval history to the Ron Paul Revolution, Rockwell blasts our statist enemies, profiles our greatest libertarian heroes, and prescribes the path forward in the battle against Leviathan. Fascism versus Capitalism by Lou Rockwell for audiobook. Find it at Audible, Amazon, iTunes, or just click in the right margin of my website at scotthorton.org. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com.